much, Mukulika. It's an absolute pleasure to have the opportunity to listen and learn more than anything else. And I think both the speakers preceding me gave us very, very important insights and interesting similarities and contrasts to what's happening in India. A lot of the concerns on the economy, the concerns about the health system, the concerns about the impact of lockdowns, and the nature of testing that our colleague from Bangladesh spoke about mirrors very much what we've been experiencing, debating, and discussing in India. And the story of solidarity that our colleague from Bhutan spoke about, and of communities coming together, does, as you will learn from what I have to say about India, make me hear with a pinch of envy and despair, as I hope that we could replicate that deep sense of solidarity in India, which I think is missing to some degree in how we have reacted to the current episode. So let me just start by, I'm sorry, I don't have a PowerPoint presentation. Because I am quite inept with this, and my research associate is not easily accessible to make a PowerPoint presentation look good. So I apologize for that. Do bear with me. But I thought I'll first just very quickly give all of you a similar sense as everyone else has of how the virus itself is unfolding in India. So we had our first case was detected in the southern state of Kerala in at the end of January, around the 30th of January 2020. And really, we started taking things seriously and began to start giving it the kind of policy attention that it needed sometime in early March, when the cases were beginning to increase at a rate of about doubling at a rate of about 3x every day. And around the second week of March, we began, so in the last week of February, first week of March, we had begun screening international travelers. By the 12th of March, we had begun the process of closing down our borders. And on the 25th of March, when we had a total number of 562 active cases detected in India and about 13 deaths, we announced a national lockdown, which has now been given the distinction of being one of the most severe forms of lockdown across the globe. What we have done in this period is, and I say this with all the caveats of the data, the limited testing, and so on, but it does appear that we've been able to slow down growth rate. So we were doubling every 3 days, then we began to double every 5 days. Now we are doubling every 10 days. We have increased testing by about 30,000 tests per day since late March. And what's interesting about, we are, I must say, however, testing nowhere near what we need to. But what's interesting about the data that's coming out from the testing is that the cases are still growing, but we're getting a positive growth rate of about 4.8%. Now, we don't quite know why this is. This could either be because we are testing in hotspots, which was the original strategy, or that there's widespread prevalence, but we don't know because testing strategies are still evolving. But the other slightly worrying statistic is that according to the Indian Council of Medical Research, that is sort of managing and overseeing this whole process, about 69% of the cases that have been tested are in fact asymptomatic. So I think one of the big concerns that India is confronting is the degree of, or the quantum of, asymptomatic COVID cases that are beginning to emerge. And we need to have a much better understanding of why this is the case, and also concomitantly have a much better and much more robust strategy for how we are testing. And that is something that is still in the process of evolving, and I'll come to that in a minute. But just to give you the overall figures of where we stand as of today, we have about 21,000 cases of COVID cases, of which 16,216 are active, and we have about 681 cases of death. Just to put this in a little bit of perspective, India doesn't necessarily have the best public health in the best of circumstances. We have, according to one estimate, about total recorded deaths of about 1.5 million per year. And if you take the COVID deaths, it's 0.000002% of that. So in terms of the overall landscape, at least at this present moment of what we know, and there are many caveats because our death registration is extremely weak. So what we really know about the cases and causes of death it pales perhaps to the reality of what's actually happening. But COVID is a relatively significantly small relative to the nature of infectious diseases and other causes of mortality that India confronts. In fact, there's an interesting figure, and I say this again with caveats because of the fact of poor quality of recording and people not getting to hospitals at this point in time. But we have seen a significant drop in reported deaths in Mumbai according to data reported by the Mumbai municipality in this period since March 25th, in March when we began to move into lockdown. And there has been some talk about the fact that as the economy started slowing down and the country went into full-on lockdown mode, road accidents, for instance, which is a significant cause of mortality, has dropped quite significantly. So we are getting a fairly complex and mixed picture. Another useful statistic, just to put the COVID data into perspective, according to colleagues who track TB, India has about 1,000 plus TB deaths per day. We've had 681 COVID deaths recorded since we began tracking the outbreak of the disease. So not to undermine the importance of and the reality of the challenge that COVID presents, but just to put this in perspective, to be able to get a sense of how this is unfolding in India in the larger context of a country that is struggling with many diseases of the yesteryear, for which we in fact have known ways of addressing these diseases, but yet haven't been able to ensure that we have a robust enough public health system to address these challenges. And the reason I'm emphasizing this, because I think that this played a very, very important role in the kinds of policy decisions that we have taken in terms of our response to COVID, which is the recognition that India barely invests in its health system. In fact, we very often look at our neighboring countries in South Asia to remind our policymakers that less than 2% GDP investment in health consistently over multiple decades, despite a high growth rate, is truly appalling for a country like India, especially compared to our neighbors. And one of the consequences of this limited investments is that we have a very weak, well-known, very, very weak public health system. Our health infrastructure is extremely limited. The number of beds per 1,000 population is at 0.55. The number of ICU beds is significantly lower. We don't really have a good estimate of the number of ventilators we have. Quality of care remains a significant problem. And I think that both our policymakers, as well as the opinion makers, shapers, was intelligentsia of India, were well aware that if we end up in a situation where the disease escalates, the number of outbreaks escalate, we may well not have the infrastructure and the capacity to cope. I venture a guess, because I'm not the one who's making policy, but I think that played a very critical role in how policymakers thought about the challenge that they were confronting, and the recognition in their minds that we need to get this early and we need to try and flatten the curve as fast as we possibly can before we get to a place where an outbreak would become out of hand, as also buy time to be able to try and build up our health infrastructure. While we were very quick on the take in terms, or relatively quick on the take in terms of screening international passengers, over 15 lakh international passengers came into India in late February, early March, just before we began to close our borders. We weren't as effective about testing, contact tracing, isolating, and quarantine. That begs the question whether we should have done that more because our health infrastructure is weak and cannot cope. But at the time when it looked like things were about to get out of hand, as Italy began to explode, the United States began to explode, our policymakers across the country, whether it was in states or at the center, in their wisdom felt that the lockdown was what we needed to do. State in India, as you all know, is a federal system. State governments, where outbreaks were beginning to look like they were getting out of control, or we were at least entering into stage 2, had already begun slowing down and beginning to lock down when we went into this nationwide one-size-fit-all lockdown in March, on the 25th of March. On the 14th of April, this was meant to be a 21-day lockdown. On the 14th of April, a decision was made to extend the lockdown by another 19 days, about 2.5 weeks, to the 3rd of May. And we will see, I guess, closer to the time what happens in the 3rd of May. What's happened between March 25th and today has also been extremely critical in terms of shaping the challenge of the economy that India now confronts. It is important to remember that even before India went into lockdown, our economy was in any case going through a fairly significant slowdown. We recorded the lowest GDP growth in the last quarter, actually in the entire fiscal year, after many, many decades. And key drivers of the economy were going through a significant slump. And it's in that context, so government revenues were much lower than projected, and fiscal public finances were very stressed. And it's in that context that the economy then comes to a complete and frankly quite unexpected halt, in that our Prime Minister came on television and announced the halt at 8 p.m. and at midnight we went into a lockdown. One of the things that caught all our policymakers and many Indians by surprise was that urban India, and frankly the key drivers of the Indian economy, are fueled by casual workers, migrant workers that come from rural India into our cities, some usually as short-term migrants for a period of 3 months. And as the economy began slowing down in the run-up to the lockdown, and with the lockdown, our migrant workers, quite rightly, in my view, found themselves without an income, and in a context where they had absolutely no social protection, and with no work, with no income, with no guaranteed social protection from government, did the only thing that anyone would do in a moment of crisis, try to find their way home. And so we had, for the first week or so, this mass movement of people, literally by foot, trying to find their way home, as public transport had come to a total standstill, with absolutely no support and social and food and or income support from government. Towards the end of the first week of the lockdown, the government then took some steps which to announce a fiscal package. It's relatively small. We have still not universalized the provision of food. We are providing very small and limited amounts of money as cash transfers into people's hands. It begs the question of what happens with migrant labor who are either in transit or now stuck within borders of states, being prevented to go home, trying to find work for with absolutely no access to work. So we're currently in a situation where we don't yet have a robust enough relief package from government. Our government is still to figure out what kind of fiscal stimulus it wants to inject into the system as the entire economy has come to a halt. We have, as of 2 days ago, begun slow and careful opening of the economy in rural areas, and in some areas we've now sort of gone into the mode of a graded lockdown. Some districts where we don't yet have COVID patients are being tagged as green zones, where some amount of economic activity is slowly recovering. Others which have a large number of COVID patients have come to a standstill. The two big lessons, and I'll stop there, that we've learned in this period of time. Number one, the lockdown itself was really badly unplanned. Not only did we have this massive humanitarian crisis of migrants trying to reach home, we've also had a significant challenge with moving our supply chains. And this is affecting the agriculture economy, that is extremely significant for the rural economy in India. It's affecting food supplies and the food economy more generally. It's also, and the combination of this difficulty with supply chains and the migrant worker issue has meant that access to labor and transportation, even for those parts of the economy that are now opening up, still remain a significant challenge. There's a significant amount of confusion because the government is changing its mind as it's learning while it's doing every single day. So communication channels within the government are quite complex, leading to a lot of confusion. We've also seen the only clear message that has gone from top to bottom, large-scale enforcement. So we've seen a significant use of the police in ensuring that people respect the terms of the lockdown, which has also led to cases of significant police brutality. We have also seen occasions where communal tensions have bubbled over, and that too is a matter of great concern. We've also seen a lot of centralization of decision making, which is making states much more, which is making things much harder for states to align their responses to their own needs, which is causing its own sets of confusion. So the federal fault lines are very much visible in India at this point. But on the upside, much as we are seeing the worst of our society unfolding in this moment of crisis, we are also seeing pockets of solidarity. Civil society in India is robust and active and has played a very, very crucial role in pushing the envelope on the kind of for the most vulnerable sections, and also trying to contribute in a significant way to building new fora, new ways of ensuring that feeding, community kitchens, support, distress calls for migrant workers and other support systems are well in place. And that, I think, is a space for much hope. And also we have a fairly mobilized intellectual community that is at least trying to ensure that it is adding more knowledge and more understanding into governmental decision making as things evolve. So that's where we stand, and we can talk a little bit more in the Q&A later.